Hello, this is Joe the Night Stalker with unsolved celebrity deaths. Let's do it. Henry Hudson was a famous sailor in the 17th century that found Canada and the northern United States, but then he disappeared during sea. Thora Birch was an American socialite. She was the daughter of Vice President Ambrose Bruss, and she was also married to husband of governor of South Carolina during the War of 1812. She was lost at sea at 27. Edgar Allan Poe, most famous for The Pit and the Pemblow and The Raven. Nevermore, nevermore, nevermore. He was found dead in the middle of the fucking street, and his clothes didn't even match his personality. Ambrose Bierce, the most famous writer of 20th century. He went missing. Some say he killed himself. Others say he was killed in the Spanish-Mexican War. We'll never know. Thelma Todd was the famous blonde girl of the 1930s. She was found dead in her car, but her legacy lives on in TCM movies. Put her movies in the National Film Registry. She would have wanted it that way. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart was a girl that could fly around the world, but she disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean. Did she get kidnapped, die at sea, survive the crash, and fake her identity? We'll never know. Robert Johnson. He was the famous blues singer of the 1930s. Some say he sold his soul to the devil for rock and roll. That's true. And his most mysterious death was never solved. He was probably poisoned by some motherfucker that was he was looking at a hot girl's stripper's ass, and then the husband noticed and poisoned him. And the husband was never charged for this crime, and nobody know who he was. Barbara Newhall Fallen was a famous writer when she was only 12 and 15, but she gave up writing when her fucking dad had sex with a stripper. And then her husband didn't even look for her. And her mom didn't even. And guess what? She wasn't, and the people didn't know until 1966. Fuck her dad. I hope her dad is burning in hell. Bugsy Siegel was a famous gangster who would tell you to fuck off or he'll shot you with 1,000,000 guns. And he was found dead. No gangster has found his death. Gene Spangler was a background extra in the Three Stooges short, but then she disappeared. And her husband disappeared too, and so did her child. What happened? Obvious gangsters. Weldon Keys was a famous 50s poet-writer. He found up he gave up on life, but some say he committed suicide, but his body was never found. Some say he faked his own death. George Reeves was the famous Superman. Some say he committed suicide, but his friends say he would never do that. Some say the mob or even his girlfriend killed him. That is, yeah. Michael Rockefeller was his dad was Nelson Rockefeller, who served as vice president for Gerald Ford. Some say he drowned in a river. Others think he got cannibalized, and others say the tribe accepted him as one of their own, and he became Michael the Barbarian. Bobby Fuller, his most famous song was I Fought the Law. He was found dead in his car. the police got rid of the gas can, which is fucking evidence. They never questioned anyone. But Bobby Fuller's parents say he didn't want to kill himself because he enjoyed life. The most popular theory is that he was tired of being a band and he wanted to do a solo career, but Sean Flynn, his dad was Errol Flynn, and he did some movies here and there, but he didn't really care for them. His movies were actually pretty good. You should check out Sean Flynn's movies. But he didn't want to be a movie star. He wanted to be a photographer in the Vietnam War. But sadly, he was captured by the guerrillas in the Vietnam War, and he was executed, and he was killed. His body was never found. Oscar Zia Acosta was his best friend, Hunter S. Thompson, who smoked a lot of weed. He also loved drugs. Yeah, drugs. And his friends say he was killed by assassins and not drugs. Connie Converse was a famous singer, but she didn't find fucking success, so she quit music altogether. Some say she killed herself, but her music was published in 2009. If only the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would put her in her spot. Jim Sullivan. He only released 2 albums before going to Tennessee. It cost him his life. And he was abducted by aliens and a UFO. I would say he's now a rock star in planet XR572-3. Bob Crane. On screen, Bob Crane was the famous hero of Hogan's Heroes. But behind the scenes, he had fucking sex with strippers and hookers. And he was killed. Some say his friend John Carpenter, no relation to Halloween, was behind it all. But he was found not guilty. His killer was never found. Kristin Helmsworth was a famous actress during the 70s. She was killed in the street and nobody cared. Peter Ivers was a famous singer of the 80s, and he hosted his own TV show, New Wave Theater, but he was found dead in his apartment. No trace of the killer was ever found. Brian Spears Smith. He was a famous hockey player, but his life went downhill. He was arrested, and then after bail, he did some drugs and all that stuff, and his killer was never found. Richie Edwards was a famous singer of Manic Street Preachers, and some say he faked his own death to escape fame. I would say escaping fame. Tupac and Biggie. These gangsters were bad motherfuckers at their finest, and their killers were never found because they were shot dead at a red light. It's a terrible tragedy. Jack Nance was famous for the cult classic Eraserhead and was best friends with David Lynch, who cast him in Twin Peaks. He got into a fist fight with 2 people at a donut shop. The killers were never identified. Brian Bison Daly was a famous basketball player. He was killed in a boat trip. His body was never found. It was terrible. Joe Pisser was a famous child actor. He was going to make a comeback, but he was killed by a mysterious man. His parents think he committed suicide, which I don't believe that. That's not true. He was a nice kid. He will be missed. Jim Gray was a famous computer scientist who loved the world and invented computers. He went on a boat trip. Some say his boat sank, but he was a great boater. We will never know what happened. And finally, the director, David Slames, a famous Swedish director. He went into an afternoon walk and his body was never found. He will be missed. Do you know any missing celebrities? Do you know any random people that found out dead and their deaths were never solved? Let me know in the comments below. This is Joe the Night Stalker saying, stay safe out there, because Joe the Night Stalker will always be on your side.